What's up guys, Perry from Rockville here, and today I'm going to show you how to set up your PPA53. Along with the preamp itself, it also comes with a power supply to power the preamp and a Bluetooth antenna that goes right on the back. All you have to do to attach the Bluetooth antenna is line it up to the Bluetooth antenna port on the back of the preamp and then screw it on just like this. The preamp is also 1U rack mountable. We have these rack ears on each side so you can mount the preamp into your rack unit. You can also remove the feet on the bottom of the preamp so it can fit better in your unit, and just remember that you need the 1U spacing. So before we dive in, let's take a look at the controls, inputs, and outputs on the PPA53, starting with the front of the preamp. All the way to the left, we have the power switch here to power on the preamp. So I'll go ahead and flip that on. Then we have buttons for music playback when we have a device connected to the preamp. So we have the pause play button to pause or play our tracks. We have a stop button to stop the music. We have a skip forward button and a previous button to cycle between tracks. You can also hold down the skip forward and the previous button to set the volume for your Bluetooth device and your USB device. And we have a mode button to switch between Bluetooth mode, USB mode, etc. We have a volume for Bluetooth and USB devices, and we also have a headphone volume. Then we have a combo jack for XLR or 1/4-inch cables to connect a microphone or instrument. Next to that, we have the volume knob for your microphone or instrument. And then next to that, we have a 3-band EQ with a bass knob, a mid knob, and a treble knob. So we can use these to manipulate the sound coming out of our preamp. So the bass knob can be used for all of the low-end frequencies, the mid knob can be used for the mid frequencies, and the treble knob can be used for the high frequencies. We have the balance knob to balance the sound between your left and right speaker, and a master knob to control the volume coming out of the preamp, and this is also important for when you're using your preamp with your recording setup. We have a mono button to switch our preamp from stereo to mono, a mute button to mute everything coming out of the preamp, a low cut button which acts as a high pass filter so it cuts the low end frequencies coming out, and we have a loudness button which will actually boost the high and low end coming through. Lastly, on the front we have the input selector switch to switch the input of the preamp. So we could set this to interface when we're using the preamp with our recording setup. We can also switch this to line 1 if we're using the 1/4-inch left and right line inputs on the back of the unit. We can also set it to one of the 3 aux inputs, which again are on the back. And we also have the phono input if we want to use a turntable with the preamp. You would connect your turntable into the phono input on the back. Another cool thing to note is that this is an RIAA preamp, which means it's going to boost the volume from your record player for the best sound quality possible. So on the back of the preamp, you have all of these RCA inputs like I mentioned earlier. So you have aux 1, aux 2, aux 3, and phono. Next to the phono input, you also have this ground post. So if there's an unwanted noise coming from your turntable, you can use the ground post to eliminate that noise. Then you have the line 1 1/4-inch input, so you can connect any device that has 1/4-inch outputs. You have the USB interface port, so you can take a USB-A to USB-B cable, plug the USB-B end into the USB interface port, and plug the other end into your laptop or computer. You also have an RCA output, so you can take the signal from your preamp and send it out to another powered speaker, subwoofer, etc. And you also have XLR outputs, so you can set up a pair of speakers to the preamp. And then lastly, you have the Bluetooth antenna port. So if you haven't already, you can take the included Bluetooth antenna and screw it on to the Bluetooth antenna port. And this is going to strengthen the connection between your Bluetooth device and your preamp. So one of the ways we can set up our PPA53 is as an audio interface with our laptop or computer. So for this setup, you're going to need a USB-B to USB-A cable. You're going to plug the USB-B end into the USB interface port on the back of the preamp. Then you can plug the other end into the USB port of your computer. You'll also want to set the input knob on the front of your preamp to the interface mode. The next thing we're going to want to do is set the preamp as our input and output device on our computer. So to do that, we're going to go into the sound settings of our computer here. You're going to want to find the output tab first and scroll down until you see the USB audio device, and you're going to want to click on that so that we can set the preamp as our output device. Then we can go into the input tab here and do the same thing. Look for the USB audio device, click on it to set it as the input device, and now we're all set. We also recommend you do the same exact thing in whatever DAW you're using. So you'll want to go into the sound settings of your DAW and make sure that the USB audio device is set as the output and the input device. Now the next thing we can do is set up our studio monitors to the preamp. To do that, we're going to need two XLR cables so we can plug them into the XLR outputs on the back of the preamp. So I'm going to take the female end of both XLR cables and plug them into the left and the right XLR outputs. Then I'm going to take the other ends and plug them into the XLR inputs of my speakers. And just make sure that the cable coming from your left output is going to your left speaker, and the cable coming from your right output is going to the right speaker. And one thing I want to point out to you guys in general is that you always want to make sure that your interface or preamp is powered on first before powering on your speakers, because otherwise this could risk damaging your speakers. The next thing I'll want to do is set the volume just midway on my speakers. And whenever you want to listen to anything through your speakers coming from your computer or your DAW, you're just going to want to raise the master volume here on the front of the preamp. So now with this setup, we can hear everything from our computer, whether we're listening to music or we're working on a project in our DAW. And if you wanted to, you can set up a microphone into the mic input here, and it will show up in your DAW. If you are going to use this setup, we recommend lowering the volume of your speakers and plugging in a pair of headphones to listen back to your voice and the music coming through your computer. So I can take my XLR cable and plug the female end into my mic, then plug the other end into the XLR input on the front. Then I'm gonna raise the microphone volume knob up here. The next thing you're gonna wanna do is go into your DAW and create a new track, and make sure to set the input as input 1. And if I talk into the microphone, check 1, 2, you'll see the signal coming in here. So now you can hit record and have your voice recorded in your DAW. And because this is both a microphone input and a line input, you can follow the same exact steps if you wanted to record an instrument instead, whether you're using an XLR cable or a 1/4-inch cable. You can also use the 3-band EQ to manipulate the sound going into your recording. So if you're using your microphone and you feel like there's too much low end, you can try lowering the bass knob and increasing the high end with the treble knob. Another way we can use the PPA53 is with our home theater setup, because we have up to 3 aux inputs that we can use on the back of the preamp. So if your TV has a set of RCA outputs that you can use for sound, you can take an RCA cable, plug one end into the RCA outputs on the back of your TV, then plug the other end into either of these aux inputs. So for example, let's say aux 1. The next thing you'll want to do is use this input selector here and set it to aux 1 if that's the aux input that you're going to use. And just double check the sound settings of your TV and make sure that the audio is coming out of that RCA output. To get the sound coming out of the interface, you can set up speakers just like these through the XLR outputs on the back of the preamp. So you can just take some XLR cables, plug the female ends into the left and right outputs on the back of the preamp, and plug the other end into the XLR inputs of your speakers, and just make sure that the cable coming from your left output is going into the left speaker and the cable coming from the right output is going to your right speaker. What's also cool is that you have the remaining aux inputs that you can still use. So if you wanted to set up a record player, you can use the phono input, and then you have the remaining aux inputs that you can use for other music devices. And then from there you can use the input selector to switch the source coming through the interface. And another cool thing is if you wanted to expand your setup even further, we have a set of RCA outputs that we can use to set up another powered speaker or a powered subwoofer. If you have speakers set up to your PPA53, you can expand your setup even further by using the RCA outputs on the back of the preamp. So to do that, you're just going to take an RCA cable, plug one end into the RCA outputs on the back of the PPA, then plug the other end into the RCA inputs on the back of your sub. From there, you can power on your subwoofer, set up the volume and the crossover, and you'll be good to go. I just went ahead and did that with the subwoofer I have on my floor here, so let's go ahead and hear how it sounds. Makes a big difference. Really feel that bass. That sounds really good. Remember, you can follow the same exact steps if you wanted to use a powered speaker instead of a subwoofer. What's also really cool about the preamp is if you set up a Bluetooth device or if you use the USB input on front, it works independently from the inputs that you have plugged into the preamp. So for example, you can connect a record player to the preamp and have music playing from the record player while you have music playing from your Bluetooth device at the same time. So speaking of which, let me show you how to set up a Bluetooth device like your smartphone or tablet. For starters, you're gonna wanna make sure to go to the mode button here on the front of the preamp and make sure that it's set to Bluetooth mode. Then from here, you can go into the Bluetooth settings of your phone or tablet, search for the device that reads PPA53, click on it to pair, and you'll know your device is connected when the BT sign on front stops blinking. Another thing to keep in mind is that these four buttons here, the mono, mute, low cut, and loudness buttons, only work with the devices that you plug in through the RCA inputs. So let's go ahead and hear how it sounds. Combination of the speakers, preamp sounds really good. Another cool thing we can do is set up our record player to the PPA53 because of the dedicated phono input on the back. So to do that, I'm going to take an RCA cable, plug one end into the RCA output of my record player, then plug the other end into the phono input on the back of the preamp. If your record player already has RCA outputs coming out of the back, you're just going to take the RCA end and plug it into the phono input. The next thing we're going to want to do is use the input selector here to set the preamp to phono mode. Then you're going to plug the other end into one of the available aux inputs on the back of your preamp. So for today, we'll choose aux 1. Now there is a dedicated phono input on the back of the preamp. However, this is only meant to be used for older record players. So if you have an older record player, you can plug it into the phono input on the back of the preamp. And there's even a grounding post on the back of your preamp, so you can use this with the grounding post on the back of your record player to cancel out any hum. So again, we're using the aux input instead of the phono input because we're using a newer record player. And the preamp on the newer record player is the same as the phono input on the back, so it would be redundant to use the phono input in general. So to recap, if you're using an older record player, you would want to use the phono input along with the grounding post on the back of the PPA53. And if you're using a newer record player like this one here, you're going to want to use one of the aux inputs. So now to hear the record player through the preamp, we're going to want to set the input selector here to aux 1. Then we can raise the master volume for our preamp, and if there's a volume knob on your record player, you're going to want to raise that as well. And remember, you can use the 3-band EQ if you want to use that to adjust the sound coming through. So let's spin this record and hear how it sounds. guys how easy it is to set up your PPA53. But of course, if you have any questions, comments, or concerns, feel free to reach out to our customer support team through phone or email. As always, I'm Perry from Rockville, and we'll see you guys next time.